Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at B2B World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is going to be a focus on the economic situation in the country, particularly with taking a particular focus on the talks that are underway between the IMF and Pakistan, and of course the discussions for an extended fund facility with the IMF. The interesting discussions, of course, around this center in terms of what exactly will be the way forward and the decisions that the government would have to take, and how much negotiating bargain do we have in terms of being able to move forward with a way that does not add more pressure to the already suffering population in the country and the economic woes of businesses and investors, but also at the same time balances out the direction that is needed for Pakistan to move ahead. How successful will the team be in doing so, and what will be the major points of negotiations, and what will be the outlook like in the coming months and years is what we're going to be discussing in the show today, as well as, of course, the upcoming budget, tough decisions for the government, particularly in terms of these negotiations, and then, of course, with poverty alleviation in the country as well, and, of course, other concerns with regards to the energy crisis, debt management and expenditure control, which seems to be also major issues for the IMF. So we're going to be taking a look at all of this in our first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to take a look at what is happening in the international arena with the Russian president visit to China, and the way that the dynamics between both the countries seem to be progressing, in which they have also issued joint statements speaking of a new era between both the countries, and this, of course, centered around trade and investment, and something that we saw Russia look towards China for, particularly post the war with Ukraine. So we're going to be taking a look at what this means in terms of the developing dynamics of the country, and how exactly will this impact the relationship that both enjoy, and then, of course, that the position that they have in international politics. So that's going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've been joined online for our first segment by Salman, Executive Director Prime. Thank you very much for joining us and for being part of the discussion. And let me start with you, Saab, with reference to, of course, the current negotiations that are underway with the IMF for another extended fund facility. This, of course, is a very important aspect, and we keep hearing people talking about how the only way forward is with the IMF. So this negotiation is extremely important for us. But of course, at the same time, what exactly will be negotiated is also important. In terms of what is coming out so far from these talks, especially with regards to decisions around expenditure control, what do you think seems to be the direction that these talks are taking?
Thank you so much, Sana. I think more than the expenditure control, the way I see it and the way it has been reported in the media, the revenue maximization seems to be the core focus of current round of discussion with the IMF. Already we have seen the news, although it is not verified, attributed to IMF estimates that IMF believes that Pakistan has a tax revenue of an additional 7 trillion rupees, up from about 9 trillion rupees at current level, which in my opinion is unrealistic. I do not think that Pakistan's economy is able to generate that much revenue in a very short span of time because of where the growth rate is. And so this revenue forecast would put FBR under an unnecessary pressure to squeeze from the existing taxpayers, which will be, I think, not welcomed. Already we have seen the failure of Tajir Dost scheme. The other two stabilization measures, which is the exchange.
Continue. We seem to lose your voice in the middle, but please carry on. I think there's an issue. As soon as you start speaking, we lose the voice. But while you wait, there seems to be some sort of sound coming in.
Yeah, because...
Right, we're going to come back to you, and hopefully it will be fixed by then. But Farrukh, with reference to, of course, what Mr. Ali Salman started off, especially in terms of tax revenues, where exactly do you think that this discussion is going to go, particularly in terms of the measures that the government will have to take?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. I think that the biggest issue right now is again the same one that we have been encountering for the past 5-6 years, and that is the trust building between IMF and Pakistan. And I think that those negotiations are going to continue. Naturally, there are going to be concerns or questions regarding ensuring that you have the minimum amount of fiscal deficit, and to actually take care of that, spending has to come down and revenue or income has to be increased. The biggest problem then, when you talk about our methods or the way we actually move forward, is usually because we have a post-colonial state structure. Our bureaucracy that is involved usually goes for very dire methods of collecting taxes. When that doesn't happen, because of course when nobody seems to care about the due process, then what happens is that it is based on muscle power. So whosoever has more muscle power, in the end they prevail. And then what happens is that most of these taxes come out of indirect taxing methods, and that means that there usually is an increase in GST. So this is a huge problem that we are going to see. But of course, there are other issues that we have seen which are very encouraging. For example, the SOEs that keep on burning up cash, the government has actually come up with a plan to offload them as quickly as possible. If that happens in this country, I think that the government might be able to take care of its spending concerns, because a lot of money goes to waste. Similarly, when you talk about PSDP, our public sector development fund, there too, a program for that matter, there too we see that the kind of allocations that take place, and what happens is that the departments or the bottlenecks in the various departments are unable to do justice to those projects, and then there is a lot of corruption in disbursement of the cash also. So the government has been talking about, and we have heard the government and the allied parties talk about a public-private partnership projects or approach to PSDP as well. We still have to wait and see, because the budget is being made. Eventually what we have to see is three numbers. One, the fiscal deficit. The second one is, of course, revenue targets, and the third one is the number for PSDP. How much is that? That will tell us what kind of health our fiscal policy is going to maintain.
Right. Mr. Ali Salman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine, Sana.
Yes, we can hear you fine as well. Please continue, finish your point, please.
Right, so I was I like to continue from that, and particularly about, I was listening recently to Minister for Planning S.N. Iqbal, who admitted that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ali Salman, unfortunately there still seems to be a lingering problem with the mic. It comes and goes. So we're unable to understand you completely. We're going to try again and hopefully get back to you. I know you have to leave by 10:30, so we're hoping we're going to get some insight from you. But let's also continue, Faisal, with regards to what we see happening ahead, especially in terms of the decisions that the government is going to have to take. And we know that the budget is coming in soon, and a lot of these measures and actions are going to impact what it is that the government will also be working on then. How difficult do you think this will be for the government then?
Sana, obviously, if we talk about the government, I mean, this tenure and the previous tenure before the interim setup, of course, they had very tough decisions to make, and of course, them decisions were sort of, to bring the economy back on track. And I suppose, their decisions, though it seems as if they were very tough decisions, but they were need of the hour, and they did make it. And right now, of course, we are, seeing them making very tough decisions in terms of, in more taxes towards the people, and of course that ends up inflation getting out of control. But of course they are trying their level best to control it at the same time. Reason being, the governments of led by PMLN, they are always considered as business friendly governments and people friendly governments. But of course this time around, the kind of situation we were faced with, and of course it was the time when after 2 consecutive years of COVID, of course we were hit by, as many of the countries, our economy was hit by the backlash of it. And of course it required to make certain decisions related to increasing the taxes and more levies, and we saw that it did take place. But just to bring the economy back on track, and of course there are certain decisions which are being made related to SIFC as well, that we are sort of going through a process of movers and shakers. As we know that in any business, movers and shakers plays a pivotal role whenever they are in trouble and seeking more customers. And of course our economy is in the phase of movers and shakers. We know that SIFC is trying its level best to of course enhance Pakistan's economy in terms of agriculture, mining and all of the sectors. Even the IT sector is being looked after as well. One window operations are being introduced, and that one window operation is an sort of excellent decision when it comes to attracting more FDIs. So probably that's why it is a phase in which all we see is the very tough decisions made by government.
Absolutely. I believe Mr. Ali Salman, you've joined us on telephone line. Can you hear me well?
Yes, and I can hear you.
Yes.
Great, we can hear you as well, and hopefully third time's a charm, so it's going to work now. Please continue.
All right. So at that point, I was making a point about public expenditure. I think the discussion has moved on, and I'm happy to just join the discussion on the investment front. I think Raja Faisal was talking about the potential of FDI and potential of natural resources, which Pakistan has been marketing, and a recent Saudi visit to Pakistan was a part of that. But I have a problem with the approach of a single window, as we call it. And the whole marketing has been so far that we can somehow help the investors, that is, the SIFC can help the investors to bypass the bureaucratic red tape. Now, if we know the problem, if we know that there is red tape, of course there is, and the regulations are not helping, or this issue of policy stability is there, then why don't we try to address that rather than offering a parallel route, which actually, frankly, also has been objected by IMF and other investors. So I think Pakistan and the Pakistani government needs to seek investment on pure economic terms rather than on friendly terms, as they call it. There is no friendship in the economic relationship. Everyone is looking for interest and maximizing their own return. So I think our approach needs to radically change to where we can offer the maximum return to potential investors and offer it openly, offer it transparently, offer it on a competitive basis. In the past, we have created opportunities for China, but we have not been able to bring other countries in the investment. Similarly, now we're talking about the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and UAE, which we welcome, but we need to open up the system, and we need to make sure that, for instance, a simple issue of repatriation of profit, which has become a big question mark, because we stopped allowing the MNCs who are present in the country to repatriate their profit back to the headquarters. And that became a major question mark for the existing investors, who would then provide a negative signal to their future investors. That's how the world works. So I think so far we have not seen any tangible outcome from the SIFC front in terms of bringing investment. And so I think there's a need of reassessment of the strategy and going back to the drawing board as far as the investment strategy is concerned.
Right. Dr. Saab, I'm glad that you're talking about various aspects of improving the tax collection and then investment also, particularly FDI. But in the end, any reform is essentially, particularly about economics, is about balancing the books. So if you can't raise more taxes or revenues, at least cut down the spending. So there are two aspects which are very important, two or three actually. One is SOEs. Could you actually tell us how exactly is the government faring in the concerns regarding offloading as many assets as possible? The second one is circular debt, and that again is a huge issue. And the third one, of course, is PSDP and reforming PSDP, sir.
So first of all, these are all the important most areas identified by IMF. I think the SOEs. I was listening recently to the Minister for Privatization, and I gained some confidence after listening to him. I think it seems that the PIA privatization is on track, and so we will hear some good news in next few weeks' time. There is huge interest from local and partly international investors. So, and there are about at least I think 45 SOEs which are commercial in nature, which are already on the list of privatization. And I hope that, and I'm actually confident that government will move swiftly on the privatization. So that's the SOEs and the reduction in the expenditure. Now, linking it with also the energy sector, as you mentioned, the circular debt, I like to mention that the only company in the power sector which is not contributing to the circular debt is the only company which was privatized, and which is the K Electric. And so I think that's a good example, and we need to bring all other discos to the same level of market competition and privatization. We have waited far too long and have not moved much on the privatization of discos. So not only privatization, but maybe opening up to the competition and allowing the wheeling charges so that customers from any part of the country can buy electricity. And the third point is PSDP. Now, PSDP is a big question mark, in my opinion, given the fiscal situation of the government. And we should be very, very cautious about the size of the PSDP. I have, in the past, recommended that Pakistan should actually freeze new PSDP program, given the fiscal situation, and should prioritize completion of existing pipeline of PSDP, because the longer you spend in terms of the years of completion, the higher is the cost escalation, and which of course means that the project becomes more infeasible, and it carries heavier costs for the taxpayers. So first of all, we need to see if the government needs to put its own money in any project, and secondly, public-private partnership has to be seriously explored. There is good development which is called the Public-Private Partnership Authority, and it is starting to do some good work. So that is the way to go. So I would.
But regarding PPP, sir, public-private partnership, there is a concern that Pakistan's partnerships between private sector and public sector usually end up becoming engines of corruption as well. We have seen that in the property sector particularly. So what is the safeguard that won't happen this time?
Well, I think first of all, you need to, of course, evolve a framework which is robust in nature, and you have to have strong regulator. And without a strong regulator, such arrangements, you're right, do not work. We have seen some success stories in the past. For instance, in a few years back, we tried partially some service of the railway in that domain. And I remember there was a degree of success there, but then it was wrapped up, and then we could not continue that. the same level of the arrangement in other sectors. So one needs to be cautious. One needs to bring good regulation and a robust framework to make it happen. But we need to trust the private sector to deliver. That trust in the government is very lacking.
True. Dr. Saab, whenever we talk about the economies of the world, of course, every country, they portray a confidence. And right now, of course, if we talk about our finance minister, I mean, very recently we saw that not only we are going to talk with the IMF on bailout, but of course, we are going to talk for the fresh, package as well of $6 to $8 billion. Do you think that this sort of shows that we have confidence in our economy and the current state, and we are hopeful that it will improve more and more, especially a very recent visit of Foreign Minister and obviously Deputy Prime Minister of Pakistan. He visited China, and he has discussed phase 2 of the CPAC. In this context, how do you see coming years of the economy, sir?
Dr. Ali, since you have to leave, I'll add in another question. With regards to the value of the rupee, it seemed to be depreciating for the past couple of days. Experts have all sorts of things to say about that. Many are linking it with the IMF's measures as well. What do you have to say about it, and how do you think this will be in the future? What will be the trajectory?
First of all, on IMF, my view is that IMF program needs to be further debated. And we need to take inputs from our own economists, universities, think tanks, and the discussion should not be just held within the Q block, because a lot of promises will have implications for the entire economy, and we need to also discuss long-term program. IMF remains an emergency measure, and we should not continue to depend on it. And actually, frankly, if we keep going back to IMF, this reflects poorly not just on the government but also on the IMF itself, because we are in the same program, the same prescription, and it is not delivering the desired results. And you talked about depreciation. There is an element. There is some level of risk there that as a result of the current negotiation, there will be expectation of the sudden devaluation for the exports enhancement, and therefore you may see a rupee depreciating in next couple of weeks.
Right, Dr. Saab, you actually identified only Q block. My question very quickly is that is it always only Q block, or is it P block and Q block actually working in tandem?
So by and large, the financial matters and the matters with IMF are handled in the Q block, and the P block has some role in terms of planning, TSDP, but not in the economic planning. There was a time back in the days when P block was the center of a growth strategy, and I wish it comes back, but I don't see it coming back very soon, because unless we just look at the IMF as the central pillar for our economic strategy, which we are not going back to the growth. We need to go back to the growth, and we need to restore the importance of the long-term economic planning and vision for that process.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ali Salman, for joining us and being a part of the discussion with regards to, of course, the economic situation of the country and where we're headed. Currently, of course, Farrukh, the focus is on the way that these negotiations are going and the kind of measures that are going to be taken as part of it. But what other aspects are involved in actually making sure that this entire negotiation is a success, even after we have negotiated a certain amount with the extended fund facility? It seems that historically, this isn't something that Pakistan has really done well.
Right, Sana, I think that one has to actually first of all acknowledge the contribution of the caretakers who actually really stuck their necks out and followed all the agreed upon plans, and that's why today we are negotiating after the conclusion of SBA, right? But what happens now? The economic indicators around the world are haywire. Every time if you follow the IMF's report, sometimes it is predicting some kind of slowdown of the economy, sometimes it is pointing out inflation, sometimes it doesn't seem to make sense. Why would that be? Because there are two people, I think, who actually played a very important role. One, when Donald Trump was there, he actually totally, because he was an economics a nationalist, right? He tried to actually monopolize all the global economy's flow. And after that, President Biden came and he also tried to undo that. But in the end, it became some kind of fixture of a Cold War between China and the US. And then, of course, there are fights going on from Ukraine to Israel and elsewhere. And in the end, then there is India, where you see an election going on. So I think that the key to our negotiations with IMF is in patience and biding our time also. Because remember, India alone in this region is such a big player that when it is in a kind of traumatic state, because the elections are traumatic, they end up actually impacting your economic indicators as well. So right now, only 20 days are left. What I would actually suggest to the policy makers is to actually take their time in negotiating all these issues so that that time is over. One way or the other, whosoever comes in New Delhi once again, may it be Modi, may it be somebody else, then the indicators in this region start stabilizing. And then whatever you actually negotiate is going to have an effect for long term, right? So my point is that we are trying to do whatever we are, but right now we are in the middle of such a tumult that it won't be that easy to actually navigate, because every time you ask for more suggestions from the fund, it is going to ask you first for the moon, then for the star, for the sun, and then beyond sun as well, perhaps galaxies. Mars. So everything becomes, sorry?
Mars.
Huh?
Mars.
Mars is
before
the sun, right?
Actually.
So anywhere around the world.
Right, but and another thing that I want to understand is then that when you talk about the fund asking for all of these planets in the world, I also want to understand then, isn't what the fund asking for essentially meant to be good for us? Maybe I'm confusing the metaphor, but doesn't that sound like it's asking for too much, or just taking away a lot? But isn't it supposed to be doing good for us?
Right, of course. In the long run, of course, it does. But my friend just mentioned a planet. If you think about building a house on that planet, Mars, it doesn't have oxygen, right? You can ideally actually plan a huge colony. But the problem is the people there would be dead by the time they actually are asked to settle there, settle down there. Right now, whatever IMF is asking is good for long-term recovery of the economy, and of course there are implications in terms of short terms as well. Yeah. But the kind of space that we are needed to actually implement that does not take cognizance of the poverty, of the post-COVID economic crisis that we have actually faced, and even now, given that whatever the circumstances are, because people, and inflation by the way, because of all those factors, we are burying a huge chunk of the population below the poverty line. Every time IMF actually purchases a country, may it be China, may it be India, the matrix of success is what? They brought so many people, millions of people above the poverty line. And here it is the opposite. So the fund is supposed to have some kind of conscience as well, right? Right. So what we have to do is we have to find a pace that works for our common people as well. And then, of course, it works for the reform.
But surely the fund is taking cognizance of that. Is it not? Does it not? I mean, if it's that clear, it should be something that's obvious and part of the financial plan laid out for us.
Right. Right now, in India, there is an election going on. And do you know what has emerged as the critical issue? unemployment and inflation.
Yeah.
Now, if you call it inflation, that is wrong, because it is essentially stagflation. In inflation, you have more jobs, right? In stagflation, you have unemployment and the rising price of commodities. Now, because of those aspects, what you can do is you can ensure, and IMF has very kind of approach towards actually bailing out the very poor. But what about the middle class or the working class, which is in extreme distress? Because remember that day when we were talking about, fixing numbers of tax slabs basically. And I proposed that let us actually do it in dollar numbers rather than rupee. Because rupee has been sinking. Remember when the whole process started, the price of dollar was somewhere around 100 and something. And now we are touching 300. The purchasing power hasn't increased. It has decreased. The salaries haven't actually gone through the roof. So what happens? The fund can very kindly take care of the poor, extreme poor, but then you have to talk about the people who are being made poor because of the inflation, because of multiplicity of taxes, because of the enormity of taxes, right? Because the first thing that you tax is the working class. If you pass on the, electricity prices, the fuel prices or the adjustments, so to speak, and gas also, who is the number one affected of that? The middle class, the working class. So what we are doing is, we are essentially just stamping out that middle tier of the society. Should that be the case? Or should there be some kind of, especially because then we talk about the floods and the other crises, climatic changes. Because of that also, the capacity of an ordinary man to purchase things, because then there's scarcity and people can't buy things, right? That has actually driven people down. Somehow there has to be some way of bailing them out,
right,
without actually ensuring that the entire economy sinks.
Absolutely. That's going to end our show on the issue of economy, but we're going to continue discussions with regards to what's happening in the international arena, especially in terms of the China-Russia relations and the visit that the Russian president recently concluded in China. And Faisal, I'll start with you, given the circumstances that we currently see Russia engaged in with reference to Ukraine. It seems that it's increased its inclination towards China. Now we've also seen this joint statement coming forward, talking about marking a new era in these dynamics. What exactly does that mean, and how will that really impact the situation on ground in terms of especially trade and economic relations, and especially in terms of the way that this poses an issue with the United States and the way that both of the countries are going to position themselves in the world with reference to that?
Yes, and obviously, first of all, I would like to shed light on the joint statement which actually came out from this particular visit, and that statement actually tells everything about the relationship both of the countries are having right now and what the future sort of expansion is about it. And that statement is obviously deepening comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation, entering a new era. Yeah. That means we remember that in 2022, early 2022, when President Putin, he visited President Xi at that time, they increased their bilateral trade from $117.6 billion to $200 billion. And now the figures are coming that in 2023, only in 1 year, 2023, they have actually managed to increase it not only to $200 billion of bilateral trade, they have done so to up to $240 billion, which is unprecedented between both of the countries. And of course, this $240 billion worth of the trade between both of the countries, this is being considered as pivotal when it comes to, of course, Russia being in war with Ukraine, and of course Western countries as well along with that, then nothing has happened to Russia in terms of economy. I mean, its economy as good as it used to be before, and the impact which was being presumed before the war, that impact did not do anything to Russian economy. And because the Western countries, they were hoping that there will be some kind of negative impact on Russian economy, and they'll end up, Putin would be forced into, of course, submitting the Western countries, but it is not taking place. I mean, it's more than 2 years now that they had set this stage with Ukraine, and still we are seeing that they are still there. When it comes to both of the countries, of course new pledges are being made, and that cooperation which we have been seeing in recent times between both of the countries, it is going to, of course, further cement in coming years. And we shouldn't be forgetting that this is the very first visit of President Putin to China right after the election, which you covered very recently in Russia, and that's why it is being considered as very important. And there is another angle to it, and that is that China itself is facing East China Sea turbulence. Of course, we know that America is in alliance with South Korea and Japan, and they have stationed their troops, active troops there as well. And of course, in East China Sea, China itself is facing the Americans. So both of the countries, it's like they are having their hands in each other's hands and showing to the world that they are together. And whatever the challenges they will be seeing in coming future, they will be, of course, together as we have seen in recent times. And especially, I would like to say that we know that China has so much impact, not only on President Putin, but of course, if we talk about President of Ukraine, even he tends to listen to Chinese President Xi, and probably we know that they have been trying that somehow a sort of agreement can be settled between both Ukraine and Russia, but of course they're still looking for some kind of solution. Yeah, why not? I mean, in past they have tried, President Xi himself tried to, of course, bring both of the parties to the table, and still they are trying, and it is being hoped that in coming times, of course, they will be playing their role to, of course, dry down this conflict. And I think China is in a position to do that, and we can say that because China not only is having trade relations with Russia, but they are at the same time having relations with Ukraine as well. So this is being expected that they can play an excellent role in that context as well. And we saw that related to it, Alexander Lukashenko, president of Belarus, in recent past, even they got in touch with China as well, related to the same, that they wanted to play a role, and they said that they can, of course, join hands with China to sort of arbitrate whatever the differences are between Russia and Ukraine.
Right. Farrukh, I also want to understand, and I'll ask Faisal this as well, but I'll come to you with reference to the US. What exactly will this mean, especially when we talk about the developing dynamic and the way that all of these countries are aligned with each other now that the new era, so to speak, has begun with Russia and China. What exactly will that mean for how this is posed against the US, and then also with a particular focus on how it impacts Pakistan, especially in terms of our own geopolitical interests, in terms of this alignment, and of course our very important relationship with the US and China?
All right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. I was, when you were asking this question, I thought that I'm going to, you mentioned 3 countries. Yes. I'm going to bring in the 4th, and that is not Pakistan, right?
Right.
These 4 huge pillars, one is China, Russia, America, and then of course India, right? There seems to be something, that has been going on for past 10 years. Since Narendra Modi came to power, Indian foreign policy lobby has been actually working hectically to actually talk about the possibility of China being the main rival to the US, and then the possibility of Russia actually drifting towards China, and then of course also the possibility of India becoming China's vessel or ally. So in the end the argument was spend more money, spend more money on India, spend more money on Russia, and keep them away from, because of course India and Russia have a long history of cooperation. Our closest allies are China and the US, right? Russia is the country that we kept on fighting war with, or at least supported that Afghan jihad, so to speak. Now the fact is, if you have actually gone to the YouTube, you must have seen that video by Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of UK, where she is talking about the power of Russia, that it has everything, right? It is the largest landmass or territory. I was actually wondering, why is it that you are making us talk? You should be the one who should be talking.
Yeah,
because
very recently.
Russia. But because the size is huge and the population is less than Pakistan's, because of that they have all the possibilities to survive any kind of attack. And that's why Hitler, if he failed only in Russia, nowhere else, right? But the problem that worries me, this approach of this country being your enemy, and you should actually woo us or woo that country, that actually smacks of the straitjacket of Cold War. And then one has to just look around to understand what is happening. We still have the four countries that I mentioned, all have boomers as presidents or their rulers, right? And because they have lived through the Cold War, this is what they can actually think of. And my humble submission is, of course, China and India are so big countries that they should be trading with each other and working in tandem. Similarly, China and Russia should be working together. Same is the case with the US, China, Russia, India. But somehow we have to find a way to create these differences, because that benefits the rulers of that day, especially in the countries that are insurgent powers, like Russia and India are insurgent powers, right? Unfortunately, because this mentality continues, we fail to see the biggest problems that we are seeing, that are supposed to be seen. For example, just think about Titanic that is sinking or burning for that matter. And then there are people who are actually cordoning off areas and saying that we are going to only work with that corner, we are not going to work with that one. And you all are sinking. This is a planet that is going to have hell because of the climate change. This is the planet where poverty is still increasing and is creating problems. This is a planet where AI is going to displace almost 100% jobs within 10 to 15 years. And yet, we can't actually find a way to work together. The problem then is that the fiction that has been propped up, and by the way, being a student of IR, I must tell you that that subject is essentially a pseudoscience. It doesn't mean anything. Everybody has their own theories, and it doesn't actually work. Like Barry Buzan is talking about the rise of regional partnerships of powers. I mean, what is power? It is primarily about people. And if people are suffering, what is the point of having power, right? So all these countries need to work together. And I'm glad that Russia and China are moving closer. But I don't want to see other countries actually fighting these infinite wars, because they have to just create this kind of fiction or division in which, for example, Ukraine and Russia war. I understand that for Ukraine it is a matter of existence. But in the end, where does it hurt us? It hurts people in the sub-Saharan Africa. Because of drought and because of the inflation and shortage of grain, people suffer there. So why can't we think as one race That is human race. And why is it that we have to keep on reinventing all these outdated ideas which are never going to work?
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Farrukh, for that. And thank you, Faisal, for joining us as always in the debate. That's all that we have from the show. We'll now see you tomorrow.